Real estate investing can bring big reward and big risks. So know your risks. Welcome to the Real Estate Risk Report, the show for real-world insight on real estate investment risk. Now, here's your host, Lance Pederson.
Thank you for joining us. This is the Real Estate Risk Report. I am your host, as always, Lance Pederson. So today I have with me Ken Gee with KRI Partners. He is based down in where are you at, Florida, Orlando?
Tampa.
Tampa.
Yep.
They're in Tampa. It's Titletown these days, Tampa,
It
Florida,
is.
also known as Titletown. Thanks for joining me, Ken.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So, as always, why don't we just sort of start off with, I always like a little origin story here. So I know that you're a recovering accountant, Deloitte Touche, fancy pants sort of guy. So why don't you share with me, how in the world did you go from that to, getting into sort of, multifamily and real estate investing?
Sure. So the story is, when I was a kid, I did some work for my mother's boss. He was an apartment developer. So it was 14 or 15 years old. The only experience I really got was rock hounding and all the hard labor that went along with that. So it wasn't any fun, but what I learned in just hearing and overhearing my mother was her boss had a vacation home in Florida. He had all of these things, and he seemed like he had a pretty high quality life. Fast forward, I decided I was going to be a banker first. Got my undergrad in finance and then became a banker. Spent 5 years as a commercial lender. And of course, many of my clients had real estate, and they talked about how well they were doing in real estate, so that, you continue to listen to that. I got my graduate degree, became a CPA, went to work for Deloitte. And in the Cleveland office of Deloitte, it was a massive real estate practice at the time. Lots of big real estate developers and owners, and some of the big REITs started in Cleveland. So over time, all I heard again was many of our clients just doing extremely well. And I'm not talking about, just making $100,000 a year. We're talking about lots and lots of money. Mm-hmm. So finally I said, you know what? I'm going to work at 6:30 in the morning and I'm coming home at 11 at night. This is rough, and trying to raise a family. So I decided that I needed to do this. So I spent about a year and a half trying to figure it out, right? Because I'm a pretty risk averse guy. I'm pretty careful. And, in the beginning, you have to sign personally on your mortgages, right? When you buy a building. Well, that's a pretty scary thing, right? In fact, I recall it was the only time in my life when I actually had a lump in my throat from the stress, right? It was almost a $500,000 mortgage, and holy Toledo, what were we going to do if we couldn't pay that back? So I took the plunge, bought a 28-unit building in a little neighborhood in Cleveland called Shaker Square. I had paid a guy to be my mentor. He was an attorney. He'd served his purpose, right? He said, he looked at it. He'd been in business for a long time. Said, Ken, you're going to do okay on this. And I didn't really understand or appreciate what okay meant. So now as I started to run that property, initially I had trouble leasing. All the applications we were getting were terrible, right? Just poor quality credit. And I thought, this isn't going to go well, right? And I met a lady from the city of Shaker Heights, and her name was Karen Watson. Wonderful lady. I haven't seen her or talked to her in many, many years. But she said, Ken, if you build it, they will come. She said, look, she met with me. She went to my unit. She said, Ken, put $5,000 into this unit. Make the kitchen nice. Do this, do that. And I thought at the time, are you kidding me? $5,000? Who has $5,000, right? It was a big deal. So I said, okay, I'm going to take the leap of faith with you. She said, Ken, I'm telling you they will come. So at the time, rents were $499 for a one-bedroom in that neighborhood. I renovated it, got to $599 as soon as I renovated. All of a sudden, amazingly, the applications were good people, because the good people were expecting to pay a higher rent. And so the rest is history, because ever since that moment, we've just continued to drive off that value add concept. But I owe pretty much my career to that wonderful lady who talked me into spending $5,000, which I really didn't feel like I had. So fast forward 3 years, we sold that. We made like $100,000 or something like that. It was ridiculous. In my world, that was insane 23 years ago that you could make that much money on the side, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and it's like, of course, these days it's all in vogue. But I mean, at that time, it wasn't a whole phenomenon, right? That is like value add multifamily. I mean, it's been around forever. I mean, as you know, you were working and had clients that were squarely in it, but it really that's the thing. So you've been at it, quite some time. So at what point then did you decide to sort of burn the boat, so to speak? I mean, when did that happen?
To do what?
Like to burn the boats. Like when did you decide to be like, okay, I'm not going to go to work at 7 a.m.
Oh, right. So what happened was after I decided, well, interestingly enough, I wanted to learn to fly. So I was working in downtown Cleveland. There's a airport literally right downtown Cleveland. So I would go on my lunch hour. I would drive 5 minutes to this airport. I would go do my flight lesson, and I learned to fly on my lunch hour. Then I realized, wait a minute, this thing is poorly run. I can buy this thing and make it right? So there's always a story, right, to all these things. So I believed that people wanted to fly brand new airplanes, not airplanes that had shag carpet in them, right? Because it's an airplane. You don't want to fly something that's older than you are. So I bought the company. We redid all of the inventory, brought in all brand new Cessna airplanes, grew it to 3 locations. Interesting thing that happened right about that time was 9/11. So that was a tough time. Between the time I bought the company and 9/11, I actually quit my job at Deloitte, decided I was going to go off on my own, and scary time because then 9/11 shut us down for a year. However, all during this time, I continued to grow our real estate little by little. And so, there was a period of time where that absolutely supported me. Fast forward maybe a year or two after 9/11, I sold the company and have been in real estate nonstop ever since. So it was actually the purchase of that company that caused me to leave Deloitte. But it was the struggles that we went through in that company that made me revert back again to real estate and just realize, wait a minute, this is what I need to do for the rest of my life because I can do it anywhere. There's no limit to my growth. And why do I want to do some of these other crazy things with all this crazy risk when I have a perfectly wonderful standard of living right in front of me? So that's kind of what led me there.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, that's what it is. It's like this income stream, more reliable. It's not so volatile. And then at some point, you guys made the move from Ohio to Florida.
We did, yeah. So we went through every person that's been in this business for 20 plus years remembers 2008, 2009, and it was a rough time. We owned and managed a lot in the Cleveland area. Prior to that, in the early 2000s, we decided Cleveland's not growing. We really want to get to a growth market. So 10 or 15 years, about 15 years ago, we started to go down to Florida. Started understanding the markets. And again, like before, it took me a year and a half to get through that process of understanding the markets, getting to the point where I was comfortable. We weren't able to buy anything right before the recession in Florida, but that's okay. We bought just shortly after the recession. And then we've been down there ever since. And there's no way that we'll leave Florida or those growth markets. I mean, it's just too crazy a growth.
Yeah. So what made you choose at that time Tampa, like over Orlando or any other area?
Yeah, I always believed that Orlando was heavily dependent on the amusement parks, and it is. But back then, it was even more so than it is now. It's much more diversified now than it used to be. So I liked Tampa because it had so much water. If you look at the map, you can see there's so much water influenced real estate. It just seemed like a really cool up and coming town. And then as I started to understand the markets, what I learned was back then, 10 or 15 years ago, there's a concept called the I-4 corridor. You don't hear people use that term anymore, but what was happening is Tampa and Orlando were growing together. And that's exactly what's happened now. I used to be able to drive across I-4 and there would be 10, 15 miles where I wouldn't see much at all. That does not happen anymore. So those two cities are growing together. So I bought our first property in Clearwater for the reasons that I just described. It's just a really wonderful town. Lots of people are moving there. And, it just seemed like all of the macroeconomic factors were just stacking up in my favor. So that's why we started in Tampa.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then for you, at some point, you guys decided to get into the third party property management game. I mean,
we did.
So what was the impetus behind that?
Yeah, really good question. So what happened to us, in Cleveland's not it's not a town where most people invest from outside the city. So Cleveland never really had a third party management industry because it didn't need one, right? It just didn't. It was an owner operator town. When I went to Florida, and what I learned very quickly was there were management companies on every street corner. The problem is it didn't seem like anyone was taking it seriously, and they felt like it was very mechanical, right? And they didn't approach it from an owner's perspective. So when I own a property, I manage it a certain way, right? I know what my goals are. I know what I'm trying to achieve, and I push that information all the way down to the maintenance guy, and make sure that everybody on site understands what's going on, what we're trying to do, because I want them to make decisions that are consistent with our plan. But I didn't see anybody doing that, right? I saw them running around doing asset inventories and all kinds of things that, yes, mechanically there are things that need to be done, but there is no way that I want to distract a property manager from leasing and occupancy. There's just no way, no matter what, those things rise above everything else. So what I learned was that there just wasn't anyone attacking the third-party management business the way we were. And we kind of rewrote that whole process. And we've just gone nuts with it throughout Florida because nobody, we're getting results that other management companies couldn't because of what we keep all of our people focused on. And, it's not uncommon to go to a third-party managed property, and if you ask the property manager who the owner is, they probably don't even know. Or let alone if you ask them what the owner's goal is, they have no clue. So if that happens, how on earth do you think that you're really going to get to where you want to be if all the people that you're relying on to get you there don't even know where you're going? So it didn't make sense to me. So in May of 18, we threw our hat in the ring for third-party management. I went out and recruited a senior management team that I could, that sort of drunk our Kool-Aid, right? They agreed with our processes. They agreed with the way we approached third-party management. And, they had managed probably 10,000 plus units throughout Florida. So we've got tons of management experience. So now what the third-party management piece of our business allows us to do is to continue to develop our infrastructure, just make it even that much stronger and it also supports our investment activities as well. Because again, we believe really strongly in, we're the best people, we're best equipped to implement our own plan. So that's kind of how it all fits together. Does that make sense?
No, it does. Yeah. I mean, it's just, you see a lot of, there's just different schools of thought, I think, in terms of, you got a lot of people who might be doing their own property management, but don't perform that service for other people. Right. And, I suppose they see that as a distraction, but I guess I'm interpreting kind of what you're saying is that you view it as a core competency. It's not just sort of a means to an end of something that has to be done. It's like you guys want to be world-class at managing properties, period. Therefore, if that's what you bring into the table, then why not manage other people's properties in addition to your own? Because it seems like it would present other opportunities, right? Because there might be an owner, if you're managing a property and that owner's sort of absentee and disengaged and not interested in investing and reinvesting, then it seems like that's a built-in opportunity to potentially make an offer and acquire an asset if they're not going to be willing to like the lady that told you to put $5,000 at the door into those apartments. I'm assuming some people are like, no, thank you. And then you're like, well, I'd be interested in buying this place. Is that part of what you know?
It could happen. It actually hasn't happened that way. Because we really are aggressive with our clients and we try, I view this management relationship we have with our clients as very much a fiduciary one, right? And if we think that property can do better, be better, we're going to take it as far as we can. The other thing that we always try to tell our people is, if you're going to sell, you got to do it the right way, right? So I get a little squirmish when I have a client that I have a fiduciary relationship with, and then I go try to negotiate with them to buy their property. I can do it, but I just get stressed. I don't like being on two sides of the same transaction because it starts to get a little squirrely, and you really got to be careful. The thing that the third party management piece has really, really helped us on is our relationship with a broker network. This is not something you would think about initially, but brokers refer us third party managed clients, and they call us now to say, Ken, I'm underwriting this property. What do you think payroll should be at this property? Because they don't want to put a number in their underwriting that doesn't make any sense, right? Because they don't want me telling the person they just referred, he's nuts. You can't do it at $600 a door. It's got to be $1,100 a door or whatever. He doesn't want those kind of problems. So what we became was collaborative with the broker community. And when you stand next to someone helping them achieve a goal, you're kind of on their team. So you develop a completely different relationship than you do if you're just buying or selling from or through them. Does that make sense? Now, when they get a deal that they think is potentially an off-market deal, who do they call?
Yeah,
they call us because they have a really solid relationship with that broker community.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. So there's your angle, right? So it's all about how you stack these things up, and it's for me, it's like you get to what if you understand all of the constituents, you really understand their problems, right, and figure out how you can be part of the solution. It always seems like it's a good a good idea. I mean, like for us at Verivest, a good example. I mean, obviously got hit upside the head with people basically begging for the services that we offer. But what I realized was that, hey, we provide back office fund administration or administration services for our clients. It's all predicated on them raising capital and being successful at doing so. So, if they're unable to raise money, then that means I've got nothing to administer. So It actually would behoove me to figure out how to help them solve their problem, which is how can I help them be discovered and meet new investors and those sorts of things? Because then, right now I've helped them solve their problem, and now we're already aligned. I mean, like we're here to try to help do that. But on the flip side, just seeing the other side of it, which is, hey, us as sort of an independent party, a neutral third party. I mean, we have reputation risk. Like if we're going to be doing the books for some client, we got to make sure it's done right. We got to make sure everything we do. We're already pregnant with the risk, right? So it's just like we can't screw it up. I mean, our whole reputation is on the line. So we're in that position, but we can leverage that position to help our clients be discovered. Much like you with the brokers. Like brokers want to know. They want to have someone that they can go and ask those questions to and get those things. That, like you said, the relationship's much different. Now, all of a sudden, when they're out there looking for something to sell, they're going to pick up the phone and call you before they tell anybody else about it. Makes a lot of sense.
It does. The other thing that happens to us is if you put yourself in a broker's shoes, if they refer a client to a management company and that management company screws the deal up, right? Because this is what we believe that a lot of our success is execution. It really is. You can have the greatest business plan in the world, but if you can't figure out how to execute, you're not going to make money. So they bring in, they've always been tasked with a referral problem. Who do I refer? Who do their buyers? Who should I have manage my property, right? And I'm sure they don't just give out our name, but we're always in that mix. And what they've learned is if that management company doesn't do a good job, the likelihood of that buyer buying again in that market is almost zero because they lost money once. Why would they go do it again, right?
Yep.
If they're very successful, the chances of them buying again are off the charts, right? Just like our investors.
Yep.
When we win, they want to win again. So they're going to hopefully stay with us. It's the same thing with the broker community. So we have found that success, it's really intertwined and it's really a team effort here to help them be successful with their business. And in turn, they're going to help us be successful with ours because Florida is an extraordinarily competitive market to buy in. It just is. It's not uncommon to have 15, 20 offers on a property. So the more you can get off market, the better off you are for obvious reasons. Yeah.
So as a good segue then, maybe share a little bit with us sort of what your overarching, or what's your buy box like? I mean, what kinds of, like what constitutes a deal that you guys are worth looking at?
Sure. So we try to stay sub 200 units because we don't want to compete with the big guys that have a completely different capital stack because it's hard to compete against that. We're looking for BC class assets. We're looking for value add. And we're looking for good neighborhoods. We don't even mind tertiary markets. We've done some of our best work in in the outskirts of Tampa, in the outskirts of Orlando, in small communities where you wouldn't think it's going to get that much attention. We generally will hold 3 to 5 years. And so what we do is, and I just had this conversation with an investor this morning, we're constantly evaluating where we're at on implementing our business plan and figuring out, we have to do a couple things. One, we need to leave some meat on the bone for the next guy. So we need to manage that because otherwise there's no incentive for anyone to buy from us. So we do that. The other thing that we do is we try to constantly assess, this was our business plan. This is how much capital we plan to invest in improvements and so on and so forth. Where's the value at now? How much more do I think I can get out of it without a whole nother round of capital, right? And so what I do is if I'm 90% of the way there, well, that means it's time to sell or very seriously think about it or refinancing and getting their money out, right? It's always more lucrative to sell because all the equity is out of it, right?
Yep.
So we tend to do that rather than hold out for that last 10%, right? I mean, how horrible would you feel if the market turned against you and you had to hold for another 3 or 4 years because you held out for an extra 10%, right? So we're constantly evaluating that value proposition. How much more can we add? And we're always trying to make sure that we're really efficient with their capital. That's really important to us because, as you probably know, the investors have 2 really happy days. The day they invest and the day after they invest, they're asking you when they're going to get their money back. That's just the way they are. And that's fine. So we're trying to make sure that we turn that capital as appropriate and efficiently as we can.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And then for you guys, then, like you said, Florida's super competitive right now. I mean, are you looking further afield, like into the Panhandle and Georgia and the Carolinas, or is that part of the, are you willing to look at stuff there, or are you pretty much just Florida?
Well, for now, so I'm sure we'll be in West Florida soon. I mean, we're getting to know those markets. We're really careful. We know Central and Northern Florida pretty darn well. And the current fund that we have, I know we can deploy it in Central and Northern Florida. So potentially the next fund or next investments will be potentially in the Carolinas, potentially in Georgia. It may even be in Texas, right? What we care about, and everybody that listens to me hears me talk about the demand supply issue here. All we're looking for is increasing demand, right? With popular growth or population growth, employment growth that's diversified, not the military, not myopic. It needs to be good and well diversified. And then in our BC asset class, nobody's building BC assets. They just don't. So as long as we have good increasing demand and we have that stable supply situation, our pricing is going to go up. So we do use that concept to find bull markets, and then we put our value add strategy on top of that. So when you do that, I mean, you're just doubling, you're stacking returns, which is why we do so well. But the basis for that is that macroeconomic picture. And I call it a macroeconomic, but we start there and then we drill down to that submarket and make sure that it's actually happening in that submarket as well. So I'm certain that we will continue to grow geographically, but for right now, this is where our focus is right now because there's plenty of opportunity right there.
Yeah. And then how do you answer the question of, because I know you're now allocating capital out of a pooled fund. And sometimes the knock on the funds is like, well, you're just going to, you'll get the commitments and you'll just go, because you're itching to buy, you'll just buy, how does one ensure that you maintain your discipline? Or how do you sort of respond to that? I mean, because it's one of those things where, if I've, it sounds like you're a disciplined guy, and the fact that you are an ex-CPA, like you said, the risk aversion and those things, like it all sort of lines up that you probably are. But, in a hot market like this, it can get emotional, right? I mean, like the fact, there's no fun losing, out on every deal that you put in a bid on.
Sure.
What are the guardrails that ensure that you can maintain that discipline?
Sure. So that's a really good question, because you're right. A lot of people get caught up in it, and they don't. Here's the number one reason why we don't do this is because I don't need to do the next deal to feed my family. I don't, right? And that's important because a lot of guys do need to do that next deal in order to feed their family. I would submit to you that if we had our first close on the fund and I couldn't deploy all of that capital, I would have very good reasons why I couldn't. And I would explain that to our investors. And I've learned this, over 23 years, sometimes the best deals are the ones you don't do. Mm-hmm. And they trust that I'm going to make good decisions about their money. If I don't deploy their capital, I don't think they're going to get angry with me. I've had that in the syndication world where Ken, why is it taking you so long to find a deal? And my response is always, I can find deals quicker, but I want to make sure, do everything I can to ensure that everything is stacked in our favor before I make that deal. And so that's why the ones that we do are generally very successful. I try to just ignore marginal deals is really how I do it. So, when you think about why do people do deals, they're doing it to make a living. If you're in my chair, right? Well, if I did no more deals, I'm going to be okay. Personally, I'm not going to go bankrupt. I'm not going to have to figure out how to feed my family. So that base, that hierarchy of need, that base need is met. So now I'm able to do things without any coercion or internal stress that would cause me to make a decision that I otherwise wouldn't. And so that's the base reason. The other reason is, I'm only 55 years old, right? I have a lot of energy. I'm still enjoying what I do. And this isn't going to be the last fund that we have, just like the last syndication wasn't the last syndication. And in our world, all you have to do is start making mistakes and your career will end very quickly. If you're trying to raise money, it just the money goes away very, very quickly. So that's a huge disincentive in my world to do that. And then I guess the last thing I would say is that, we become friends with our investors. Many of them have been with me for 10 plus years. And, we know them. I know them quite well. They're good people. I've met them from all different walks of life. And it's not just I only talk to this guy or gal when it's time to talk about an investment, right? We talk about a lot of things all the time. So, I take that relationship very seriously. And if, I don't know how much of this you've done on your own, but the last thing you ever want to do is lose someone else's money, right? I'll lose my own money all day long, right? I'll make it back. I can only yell at myself, but losing someone else's money is just not something that I'm ever interested in doing. Is that?
Yeah. No, and I agree. And I figured you answered that way, but I think it's the whole, that's really what you're trying to figure out is, it's part of the soft side of the due diligence process is just really trying to understand how, the decision maker, in this case, like yourself, is wired, mm-hmm. right? And I think that, in having an underwriting process, that sort of is the thing that determines, whether a deal makes sense or not, right? Like there's that method of the madness and the mm-hmm. propensity to be disciplined and those sorts of things and be patient. Because we've seen on the run up, obviously it was probably a good idea to transact whenever one could because it was just a runaway bull market.
Right.
And, it could be covered up. But I think now as the market is cycling the other direction, it's hard because, discipline is paramount, but at the same time, this is where having a fund and having commitments in hand, it's buying power, right? The stronger you can be, right?
Yes,
and being able to have every as many tools in your tool belt as you can when you're trying to go, like the things you said. I interpret it as, okay, deep relationships with the brokers, right? Where they're willing to sort of, get you in and connect you on deals before it sort of hits the broader market, and then being able to close, the certainty of close, all those sorts of things are the things that it's not just price always, right? So everything you can do in these markets, it just makes a difference. But they end up kind of sometimes working against people who are like, oh man, I don't want to invest in a fund because of that. Whereas I'm like, yeah, but if you invest with the right people in a fund, it can be really powerful. Like you can really take advantage of some, some things. So is that kind of how you look at it as well? Or?
It is. Well, you talked about two things. One, you talked about underwriting. That is really critical. And the other is just having the fund as a vehicle for buying. We could have continued to syndicate forever and ever, right? But it's just that much harder because when you're in a competitive situation or when you're up with a seller, please, Mr. Seller, sell to me. I promise I will be able to raise the money. Yeah. Okay, well, there's that leap of faith now that the seller has to take, and that's stressful for them because if it's a property that's marketed and they agree to go under LOI or contract with you, now all the other folks that wanted that property have to go away. And now let's say you're inexperienced, so you try to retrade. First of all, sellers don't like to be retraded, right? You should know what you're doing. And absent any crazy thing, right, you should know what you're going to find and what you're not going to find. So they want very low risk of retrading. They want a good track record of closing. And guess what? That can I raise the money risk is off the table. It is. So they know they've got a much stronger buyer. And our commitment to our brokers and to any seller that we deal with is we will make this the easiest deal you ever did. And we do that because it's critical, right? If you tear up a seller and just, take them to the wall, which I watch people do all the time. Yeah. I guarantee you that broker's not going to bring you in on the next deal. It's just not going to happen because he doesn't want that to happen to his next client. Now, on the underwriting side, the key here is, and we watch people underwrite lots and lots of different ways. We underwrite from the bottom up because we're so deep in the management side. We know how much pest control should cost. We know how much payroll should be. We know all of the various expenses and how they should be. So we don't we don't take a back-of-the-napkin approach. Okay, income's this, 50% expense, therefore NOI is that, therefore it must be worth this, right? If I did that with 3 different properties, I guarantee you, one you'll get destroyed on, one you might do okay, and one of them you might do well, right? But I'm not willing to take those kind of chances. We want to make sure that we nail everything down so that post-close, you're not going back and really redoing your budget because you just had no clue what was going on. And we watch people do that a lot on the underwriting side, and we just don't. Is it more work? Yes. Is this the CPA in me coming out? You bet it is, right? Because, you can prove every single number in that P&L except your repairs and maintenance. You just can't. You can't predict that because you don't know what's going to break. So you make long-term assumptions about your repairs and maintenance, your unit turn costs, and your reserves. I add those 3 together, make sure that they're at least a certain number, and then the rest of the numbers I can prove out. And I can prove out the rents just as well. Just take the time to do a real rent survey. Find out what the neighbors are charging. Pretend like you're a renter assessing where to live. And your property is one of the ones that they're considering. Who else would they consider, right? This is all basic, on the ground, blocking and tackling. But it's a lot of work, and you'd be shocked at how many people just don't want to take that time.
I wouldn't be shocked at this point. So,
you probably wouldn't. No,
nothing shocks me anymore. But yeah, I think you're right. It's just, and those are the things. These are the sorts of things. Because my sense is that, this is why I do the show. Is that I'm all for like dumb questions and there's no stupid questions. Like it's all fine, right? Like that's part of the learning process. But
sure,
I think that at times, people, I call it, they bark up the wrong trees, right? Like they make a big deal about things. Like what a great example is sort of like skin in the game. Like I'm all for like you want skin in the game, but it's not hard and fast, right? Like it's not because everyone's at a different point. So is it important? Yeah, but is it the most important thing? No. It's things like this. It's trying to really understand how people approach and what their process is. But I'm not surprised by it, but a lot of people, they gloss over some of this stuff when it's like, that's part of this underwriting is that you really, and even if it's a deal by deal basis or whether it's a fund, you want to know how the people in your seat can go about doing what they do at every single turn, right? Because that's when, if you can't get your mind wrapped around the method to their madness and understanding what their process is, because you didn't ask the questions, that's what's going to uncover sort of amateur hour, right? Like you're going to figure out, you have to start having conversations like this. Who are the amateurs and who are the pros? And the pros there's always a reason why they do what they do. Right.
Yes.
And it's that's the thing that you're looking for. So with that said, as a segue on the execution side, I mean, what are the things that you and your team, I mean, knowing your property managers, but do you have sort of these go-to risk mitigation things? Like how do you post-investment, mitigate risk? Like what are you guys doing to ensure that you can execute your plan? When you hit the ground running, how do you ensure that you guys just are always making market progress and not, getting caught flat-footed and,
Sure.
Everyone's got their own little things that they kind of do. I'm just curious as to post-acquisition and ongoing basis, the things are like a big deal at KRI, the things that you guys are just harping on over and over and over again.
Yeah. So the first thing I'm going to mention will probably surprise you. And I ask every one of our clients to do this, and we do it religiously. When we take over an asset, right, we have a business plan. We know everything, right? We know it all, right? Because the seller told us everything, right? Wrong. We think we know it all. We know most of what we need to know, but there's always, our business plans. I always tell people go through several iterations. The first iteration is when you do your initial underwriting to go to LOI. Then you revise it again when you get through due diligence and learn more. And then post-acquisition, we do it generally one more time. And it's after, we always sit either somewhere between 30 and 90 days after we acquire a property. Some people say, oh my gosh, why would you waste that time? We're not wasting that time because we want to make sure that we understand the risks. And is there anything that we missed during due diligence? Now, in a fund, you would say, well, Ken, just call more money if you need it, right? But that's not how you should approach this, right? We take capital very seriously. We try to use it efficiently. We have a plan. And if we need to reallocate that capital towards something else because we just, it's a little more than what we thought or a little less, right? A lot of times it's that way as well. So we want to be able to make sure that business plan still makes sense after we're 60 days familiar with the property, because you learn an enormous amount after 60 days on a property. Yeah. So that's the first thing that you probably didn't expect me to say. The other thing that we do is we're hyper focused on occupancy, even when we're renovating, because why not? If you can stay full, that's more cash that you can contribute towards the renovations and less out of your investor's pocket. And properties that are full generally put you in the best position possible. You can be tougher on delinquencies. You can be tougher on renewal rates. You can throw out the bad guys that are causing problems. And your maintenance guys and gals aren't running around like nuts trying to just keep up with all the unit turns, right? So if you ask anybody in our management team, what do I focus on constantly? It's occupancy. And everything that we do on the operations side supports that, even down to exactly what do we want our managers doing and not doing, right? We don't want our managers sitting there at their desk entering invoices into our system. Wrong. That's a waste of a manager's time. We have accounting people that do that, right? We don't want them to sit here and type out renewal letters, right? Or, a lot of the noise letters and things like that. So we give our managers back office support that most people don't. Why? Because that manager can then focus on getting out from behind their desk and going to do things that we want them to do that's going to add value to the property. So I would say that it always starts with occupancy, and all of our marketing materials, that's what you'll read. And it's true. I mean, we've developed our entire operational piece around that.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And then, so the alternative, I guess, whether or not these people that are, doing the alternative here is that it's things like you said is where, using high value resources that should be, prospective tenant facing or existing tenant facing, doing administrative things, right? So that's distraction. And then, I mean, what do others, is there another school of thought or philosophy around like when you take over a property to just start getting super aggressive to like boot out the bad tenants and then start renovating them? And is that kind of what you're saying, that there's like some people think that's a better idea instead, or it's like insisting on getting the higher rents when you could just take, what you could get today, or, how does that manifest? Like, what would the alternative be?
Well, I don't know that there's really an alternative, but So it all fits together. What I haven't talked about is our 90-day plan. I call it our 90-day turnaround plan. And we communicate this to our clients as well if we're going to do it, help them do it. But the first 30 days, you're getting to know the property, right? What's going on, figure out who the bad guys are, who's not paying their rent. And then we start focusing on, you got to pay your rent or you got to go. I can't negotiate that, right? And who are the people that are, partying all weekends and doing all that crazy stuff? So we'll start to deal with those people. And there's always an enormous amount of deferred maintenance initially. There just is. And it's because what seller works really, really hard to keep the property in tip-top shape right up to the minute they transfer it, right? They just don't. So there's always deferred maintenance. And then the second 30 days, we're really starting to implement our processes, our procedures. We're starting to understand the residents. They're starting to feel change. We're just making operational changes while we're also sizing up finishing off in terms of our renovation plans. But now we're communicating that information to the residents. Because now okay, I can see these guys really mean business here. This is what's coming. Okay, now we understand. So their first question is always, so what are you going to do to my rent? What's going to happen? Right. And so our message is always, look, you're living here. We're not going to mistreat you on renewal. You're not going to get a flat rate renewal because we're going to invest money in the property, and that's not fair. It will, if you're 300 under market, we're not going to move you $300, right? You're definitely going to move. And we view that as mistreating people. So in most locations, Florida turns properties probably 40% a year. How much faster do you need to turn that property, right? You don't need to throw people out with rent increases. You already got 40% a year anyway. So those new people, they get, whatever improvements we're doing, they get the new rents, and it really doesn't harm anyone, right? Because the old person still, is being treated fairly. They're getting a fair increase. They understand. And sometimes it's still too much for them and they have to move. But, it's $50 to $75 in a typical Florida market. It just depends on the property and what's going on and how far off market we are and things like that. But the real improvement is on those new tenants. And, again, I go back to how fast do you really need to turn that property? 40% a year is pretty good.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And that makes a lot of sense.
So I don't know that there's really an alternative. This is what we've done and we just do it this way all the time. I don't know that we would ever buy a property with the intent of just continuing to run it the way it is for cash flow. Yeah. Because that's not our business plan. We're trying to add value in some way, shape, or form. And investors in our fund, they get a preferred return. And I'd always tell them, you're getting paid to wait for payday is basically what's happening. The payday is always at the end. And it's usually, it's hopefully huge.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and that's where the alignment comes in. It's just that you got that pref ticking on you, right? It's not cheap capital, right? So it's
agreed. Yes.
Risk to like you said. I think that's where I wouldn't expect you to say, no, we actually acquire it and we kind of just wait, it's this observation phase where you're really just putting your ear to the ground and the walls, and you're just saying, what's this telling us, and does it line up? And doing basically a gap analysis or whatever of just saying what doesn't line up, and then it's like, okay, now we know what this thing needs. Revise the plan if necessary, and then get moving. Then get after it. But I loved how you shared too is that the communications piece. These are human beings. This is their community. This is where they live, right? It seems to me like that's where some people stub their toe. They don't. They kind of lose sight of the fact that these are real people. These are families that live in these places, and not to take all the, like you said, the bad guys and lump them in with everybody, right? And so being able to go in there, it does concern them that they do lose street, they lose sleep, and they get stressed out when a new owner takes over, right? And especially for you, that's just it. If you figured out how to find one with below market rents, someone might have been. The capitalist in me is great. Yeah, we're going to bump them way up. But someone else is they're wringing their hands. The tenant's oh my gosh, the rent's going to go up. So just being, humane about that. And
you have to.
You have to. Yeah. But not everyone does.
No, you're right. They don't. But what I find is that, I'm a big believer in, all you really have in this world is your reputation, right? Personally, professionally, and as a business. And that gets out, right? That gets out. It just does. And, unfortunately, residents have seen that movie before, They just have. They've seen it. They're the ones that are wringing their hands. They know they're under market. They know it. And so, I've even met with folks that said, you know what, I can't afford to live here. And I explained to them, I understand. I can't change that, though. I've invested so much money. So let us help you find another place. We will do that because that's the right thing to do, right? I tell my kids that every day I go to work, it is important to me that I imagine that they're standing right in front of me. And every decision I make, I'm not going to be embarrassed that my daughter or my son is standing there, right? If I'm able to do that, then I feel like that's the right thing to do, right? And the other thing I always tell them, if I can't make an honest living using that standard, that moral compass, well, then I'll be poor. All right. Yeah. I'm not going to cross that line. Yeah. It just makes no sense.
Yeah, I agree. That's great stuff. Cool.
Well, one other quick comment on you talked about the waiting period. The number one reason that we do that, we learn a lot, and I probably didn't finish that concept. And that was, I have seen too many times where people have allotted $200,000 for improvements, right? They went on day one and spent that $200,000, only on day 35 or 40 to realize, I need $20,000 to do this, and now it's gone. And so, I just wanted to bring that up because I see people do that all the time, and that was the initial catalyst for us to do that waiting period, and it really is effective because, especially in the syndication world, you don't go back to your partners again. It just doesn't happen. That's not how the world works.
Right. Yeah. No, I do think it's great. I liken it to the mistake you see when people start new jobs. At times they go in, especially if they're in a management role, like it's the biggest mistake they make is they just come in and they just start charging after things and they don't listen and they don't ask questions and they don't do that. That's kind of akin to this. You take over the property, you just hit the ground running day one.
You're a bull. You're just running full speed. Yep.
Yeah. And like you said, a lot of those things, I mean, I've just, I have all these conversations all day long with guys like yourself. So you hear kind of what they're doing and some of the, like you said, on the CapEx budget or the things they do, they end up, it sounded good. And then they go and do things that people never wanted, like security systems in the mobile home. Like they just, I don't know, they come up with stuff they think is a great idea. And that is going to, the point is that you don't own the property yet. So your interactions with the residents, the tenants, or whoever they are is limited. It probably makes a lot of sense to go and get feedback to corroborate that entirely before you go and, invest all this money in, it just makes sense to me it's obvious when you say it out loud, but that's really the kind of insight you can get is just take a deep breath, make sure that this plan matches, because when you're going through, due diligence and you're still, you don't get the kind of access. It's just different than when you actually own the place.
Oh yeah. No seller. Your sellers are not open books. They just aren't, and they never will be. Yeah. They'll disclose the big things, but the little ones you don't ever, you just don't ever know about. And, when I talk to investors every day, I talk to them about experience. Everything that we've talked about and our people, I drive our people nuts with this. And that is everything we do, every little detail about everything we do because of something, right? Because I solved a problem 15 years ago and I documented, this is how I don't like solving problems repeatedly, right? So what happens is over time, you get all this experience that's piling up. And so that things will run a certain way or not run a certain way. And it's not because you're smarter than anyone else. It's because you've been around for 23 years and you probably made that mistake at some point along the way. So you just get better and better at it. So that's the number one thing that I talk to investors about is this experience thing, right? You don't, I wouldn't want to give my money to somebody who's been in the business for 2 years. I just wouldn't. That should be my money that I risk after 2 years, not theirs. At least that's how I look at it. So.
Yeah, no, there's truth to that. That's why I say you never trust a leader without a limp, right? It's just, right. I'm much more willing to follow somebody who's been through a few wars and, got the scars to prove it. So, along with the limp. So cool. Well, where can people find you, Ken? How can they learn more about what you guys are doing at KRI Partners?
Sure. So KRIPartners.com. I'm on LinkedIn, Kenneth Gee. You can find us there. We've got a few videos on YouTube. It's not a big YouTube channel, but it really just focuses on what we do, how we do it. I put a case study out there. It's all me, nothing fun and exciting, but it does give you a good feel for what we do and how we do it. And, that's the best way to find us. And then just give us a call. The Tampa office is the easiest way to reach us, 813-489-9666.
Perfect. Awesome. Good stuff, Ken. Thanks so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
Yep.